It's critical when you own a property that you have sufficient insurance coverage. And so one of the ways at Maxwell Hendry and Simmons that we help with that is through completing insurable value appraisals. And what that will do is tell you what the actual replacement cost of the property should be. When you go in and secure an insurance policy, there's usually a software in the background that's determining, what the estimate of replacement cost is. Sometimes it's right, but sometimes it isn't. And one of the reasons that insurable value appraisals have been critical the past few years is given how high building costs have become, particularly in Southwest Florida. Through COVID and the supply chain issues, but also more recently as a result of Hurricane Ian, it's really difficult for those cost estimating softwares to keep up with the actual costs. And obviously the last thing anyone wants to do when you own a property is be underinsured. And so we complete insurable value appraisals that are a current snapshot of what the real replacement cost looks like. And that way you have sufficient coverage. It's important to know that if you're part of a condominium association in the state of Florida, you're required to have updates done and get new appraisals essentially for your insurable value every 3 years. That's part of state statute. And so if you're part of a condo association, you want to make certain that that's happening. We do a lot of that work, and actually condo associations can save a significant amount of money by, say, having the first time appraisal done, and then scheduled updates every 3 years, lined up contractually, so that the next 2-3 cycles even are taken care of for when you need new numbers. So insurable values are critical. Obviously, you want to make sure you have enough coverage. Don't assume that whatever the software is spitting out is going to be sufficient, particularly when a market is as dynamic as what we've seen the past several years. One thing to keep in mind with insurable values, there's no connection at all to, say, your assessment or your tax value for purposes of your property taxes, because that concern comes up often, that if you get an insurable value appraisal completed and it demonstrates, a much higher construction cost, well, is that going to kind of translate in any way to your tax bill? Those are completely disconnected processes. So the assessment process doesn't kind of plug in any way to what an insurable value is. So if you're paying attention to both your insurable value and to your assessment each year, you can be sure that you're not running the risk of doing something that provides a benefit in one column but negates a benefit in another. Most of us remember the recent Surfside condominium collapse. Well, as an outfall of that, there was legislation passed in Florida that requires inspections be completed routinely for condominium structures of a certain age to ensure that there aren't structural issues, that a resident unwittingly could be in a building and no one has looked at the structural integrity of a column for years or something like that. So these milestone inspections have to now be completed more routinely. So in addition to insurable value appraisals, milestone reports that are now required, additional inspections and reserve studies to make sure that the association has sufficient funding to take care of, when the parking lot needs to be paved, or certain structural components long-term that will need to be repaired, a roof long-term. There should be money that's being set aside for those items, and a reserve study in many cases will help plan for what those items are and how much money should be saved on a routine basis. So it's critical for condominium associations to be actively engaged in their management, even if you have a third-party manager. And again, to be sure that your insurable value is updated and consistent with what statute requires.